Are you learning English and love magical stories? This video is made just for you. Whether you are a beginner or just want to practice reading and listening, Snow White, the girl with skin as white as snow, will help you learn English while enjoying an exciting fairy tale full of adventure, friendship, and courage. Hello and welcome. I'm very happy you are here today. This video is easy to follow and perfect for English learners. Today, you will listen to a famous story about kindness, jealousy, love, and bravery. You will meet a young girl with a pure heart who faces challenges, makes friends, and discovers courage. Her story will help you learn English words and life lessons at the same time. As you listen, follow the words on the screen. You can hear the right pronunciation and see how sentences are made. If you don't understand a word, don't worry. Just pause and listen again. This is a wonderful way to practice English step by step. Thank you for choosing Easy English Official. Let's begin this magical story together and enjoy learning English with Snow White. Chapter 1. The Wish in the Snow. Winter had covered the world in a soft, white silence. Inside the grand castle, a lonely queen sat by her window, sewing with gentle hands. Each snowflake that touched the glass looked pure and perfect, like a dream that could melt away at any moment. Her heart longed for something more, something warm and alive to love. As she sewed, she pricked her finger with the needle, and 3 drops of bright red blood fell onto the snow. She watched them sink into the white, and the colors looked so beautiful together. The red on the white seemed alive, full of promise and mystery. In that quiet moment, the queen made a wish from the deepest part of her soul. She whispered softly to herself, "I wish for a child with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as this ebony wood." Her voice trembled with hope, as if the snow outside might carry her words to heaven. The wind answered her wish with a cold, gentle breath that brushed her cheek. The queen smiled, believing that her heart had been heard. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The snow melted, the sun returned, and the castle garden bloomed with color again. The queen's wish had begun to grow within her. Her smile returned, her laughter echoed through the halls, and everyone in the kingdom whispered, "The queen will soon have a child." At last, the day came when her dream was born. The queen held her baby close, and tears of joy filled her eyes. The child's skin was as white as the winter snow, her lips red as rose petals, and her hair dark as midnight. The king looked at her with pride and said, "She shall be called Snow White." The castle filled with light and laughter. Bells rang through the air, and the people danced in the streets. It was a time of happiness and hope, a moment that felt endless. The queen looked at her daughter and thought, "My heart is complete." But as life often does, joy came with a shadow. The queen's health began to fade. Each day she grew weaker, and even the sun seemed dimmer through her window. She watched her baby sleep beside her, tiny hands curling like petals, and whispered, "My little Snow White, remember to be kind." Snow fell again that winter, soft and gentle, as if the sky itself mourned with the king. The queen closed her eyes one last time, her wish fulfilled, but her life slowly fading away. The kingdom fell silent. The snow that once symbolized hope now covered the castle in grief. The king stood alone by the window where his queen once sat. Outside, snowflakes danced in the wind, beautiful but cold. He looked at his baby girl and promised her, "You will never be alone. You will always be loved. Yet even kings, cannot stop the ache of time. Seasons passed, and the little princess grew. Her laughter returned color to the gray walls of the castle. Everyone loved her, her kindness, her smile, her curious eyes that saw beauty in everything. She had her mother's grace and her father's warmth, and soon the kingdom's sorrow began to heal. But the king was still lonely. He missed the soft voice that once filled the halls. One day, he married again, to a woman of breathtaking beauty. Her smile could charm a crowd, but behind her eyes was a deep, secret pride. The new queen desired not only love, but also power and praise. At first, everything seemed peaceful. The new queen spoke sweetly to Snow White, calling her "my little flower." But as time passed, she noticed how people looked at the young princess, how they whispered about her beauty, her gentle heart, her shining spirit. Envy began to bloom inside the queen's heart like a dark flower. She spent long hours staring into her mirror, admiring her own reflection. She whispered to herself, "I am the most beautiful. No one is fairer than I." The mirror reflected her smile, and she believed it. Vanity became her comfort, her secret escape from the fear of being forgotten. But one day, the queen noticed something she could not ignore. Snow White was growing older, and her beauty was pure and natural, untouched by pride or envy. Wherever she walked, light seemed to follow her. Servants smiled when she passed, and birds sang at her window. The queen's smile began to fade. In her heart, a storm was forming, cold and cruel, like the snow that had once brought love to the castle. The same snow that had granted one queen's wish was now turning another queen's heart to ice. Each day, the queen's jealousy grew stronger. She could no longer look at Snow White without feeling anger burn inside her chest. Her love for beauty turned into fear of losing it. The mirror that once comforted her now became her greatest enemy. Every morning she stood before it and whispered, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" And every morning the mirror answered, "You, my queen, are the fairest of all." These words fed her pride and quieted her doubts, but fate was patient. One morning, when the queen repeated her question, the mirror spoke differently. "You are fair, O queen," it said, "but Snow White is fairer than you." The queen's heart stopped. The words echoed like thunder in her mind. She stared at her reflection, beautiful but trembling. Her hands turned cold, her eyes filled with fury. "No one," she whispered, "no one can be more beautiful than me." The mirror said nothing. It only reflected the face of a woman who was slowly losing her soul. That night, she could not sleep. The words of the mirror haunted her dreams. The image of Snow White smiling in the garden made her blood boil. She wanted peace, but envy has no peace. She wanted love, but her heart was full of poison. And so, the queen made a terrible decision. She would destroy the girl who had stolen her crown of beauty. She called for a huntsman, a man strong and loyal, and gave him a cruel command. "Take Snow White into the forest," she said, "and do not let her return." The huntsman bowed his head, but his heart was heavy. He knew the queen's eyes were dangerous, full of darkness. He left the castle with Snow White, leading her deep into the woods. The trees whispered above them, as if they already knew what was about to happen. Snow White followed quietly, her small hand holding her skirt, her heart full of questions. "Why are we going so far?" she asked softly. The huntsman could not answer. He stopped, looked at her face, and felt tears rise in his eyes. "Forgive me, child," he whispered. "I cannot harm you." "Run, run far away," and never return. Snow White's eyes filled with fear and gratitude. She turned and ran through the forest, branches brushing her cheeks, leaves catching her hair. Behind her, the huntsman watched her disappear into the trees. He knew the queen would never forgive him, but he had saved an innocent heart. As the forest closed around her, Snow White felt both lost and free. She did not know where she was going, only that she must keep moving. The snow beneath her feet was cold, but her spirit was warm. Somewhere in the distance, a new chapter of her life was waiting to begin. Chapter 2. The Wicked Queen and the Magic Mirror. Every morning the queen awoke in her grand castle, her reflection waiting for her in the large, shining mirror. She would walk slowly to it, her gown flowing behind her like a river of silk, and speak softly. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all? The room was silent except for her own heartbeat, which seemed loud and uneven in her chest. The mirror had always told her what she wanted to hear. "You are the fairest of all," it said in its calm, magical voice. For years, those words were enough to make her smile and feel powerful. She believed that no one could ever match her beauty. Her pride was like a fire that warmed her every day. But time changes everything. Snow White grew taller, her hair glimmered like the night sky, and her eyes sparkled with gentle light. She laughed with the birds in the garden, and her voice was soft and sweet, full of kindness that touched everyone around her. People in the castle could not stop speaking of her grace and charm. One morning, the queen approached the mirror as usual. Her reflection was flawless, just as she expected, but the words came differently this time. The mirror said, "You are fair, O queen, but Snow White is fairer than you." The queen froze, her mind unable to process the simple truth. Her chest tightened, and her hands trembled. Jealousy crept into her heart like a shadow in the night. It wrapped around her thoughts, chilling her mind, and growing heavier every hour. She could not bear to think of Snow White smiling, while she herself felt less than perfect. Every compliment that Snow White received pierced the queen's heart like tiny daggers. She began to watch Snow White secretly, hiding behind curtains and pillars. Every laugh, every song, every kind gesture seemed to burn inside her. The queen could not sleep at night, and even the soft wind outside sounded like a mocking voice whispering about Snow White's beauty. Her pride had turned into envy, and her envy soon became hatred. The queen could not speak a kind word to anyone, for every word seemed false compared to the truth she felt about herself and Snow White. Her servants noticed her cold gaze and feared her more with each passing day. The queen spent hours thinking of ways to regain the title of the fairest. She consulted her mirror endlessly, hoping for a solution, but the mirror only reflected her face and reminded her of Snow White's beauty. Anger boiled inside her, spilling into her thoughts like molten fire that could not be contained. She tried to distract herself with jewels, gowns, and feasts, but nothing soothed her spirit. Every mirror she saw reminded her of the girl growing stronger, more graceful, and more admired. The queen's once proud heart was now heavy with darkness, twisting everything she touched into fear. Her servants noticed her change. She smiled less and frowned more. She ordered more decorations, more jewels, and more mirrors, trying to cover the shadow growing in her soul. But no matter what she did, the mirror's words echoed in her mind, repeating themselves like a song she could not forget. The queen walked through the castle halls, her high heels clicking on the marble floors. She passed Snow White's door and stopped, listening to the laughter and soft humming of the girl. The queen's breath caught, and her hands tightened into fists. She could not endure it any longer. The queen began to plan. She could not bear the idea of anyone being more admired than her. She whispered in secret, "I will not allow her to be fairer than I am. Something must be done. Snow White must never shine brighter than me." Her eyes gleamed with a dangerous light. She called her closest advisers and spoke in riddles and commands, hiding her true intent. Her voice was smooth, calm, but filled with a dark edge. Everyone nodded and obeyed, afraid of the storm they sensed behind her beauty. Night after night, she stared into the mirror, tracing her reflection with delicate fingers and repeating the question, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" Each time, the mirror's answer reminded her of her failure to remain the most beautiful. Her heart thumped with fear and obsession. The queen's jealousy became all-consuming. She could not eat, could not sleep, and could not speak freely. Even the songs of the birds reminded her of Snow White. She began to see her everywhere, in the flowers, in the sun, in the castle walls. Her palace, once full of laughter and music, now echoed with her quiet anger. Courtiers whispered about the queen's strange moods and cold stares. Some wondered if the magic mirror had cursed her, and many avoided her presence for fear of her wrath. One day, she discovered a potion among her old books, a mixture of herbs and spells, able to harm and control. She held it in her hands and felt power running through her veins. She realized that if she used it wisely, she could remove Snow White from her path forever. The queen spent days preparing her plan, concealing it behind layers of secrecy. She rehearsed smiles and commands, making sure no one suspected her true intent. Every glance at the mirror strengthened her resolve. She would be the fairest once more, or no one would be. She crafted disguises and tricks, perfecting each one. She would approach Snow White carefully, like a shadow moving through sunlight. Her envy had sharpened her mind, turning her beauty into a weapon and her voice into a lure. Her servants noticed she had changed completely. The laughter in her eyes was gone, replaced by a cold gleam. The warmth of her smiles had vanished, leaving only plans and schemes. No one could approach her heart, for it was locked tightly by jealousy. Finally, she decided it was time. She would set her plan into motion. Snow White's innocence would meet the queen's cunning, and only one would come out victorious. The queen's reflection in the mirror looked back at her, smiling a cruel, confident smile. The wind howled outside the castle, carrying the first snow of winter. It seemed to echo the queen's dark intentions. No one could see the storm growing in her heart, not even the most loyal servants. The castle was quiet, but danger had arrived, and so the queen waited, patient and careful, her eyes always on the mirror. Every morning, every night, the mirror reminded her, Snow White was fairer than she, and in that truth, the queen's jealousy burned hotter than any fire. Chapter 3. The Forest of Fear. Snow White woke early that morning, her small hands trembling and the cold wind brushing her face. The queen's orders had filled the castle with a heavy, silent fear, but she did not yet understand the danger awaiting her. The huntsman appeared at the door, his face somber, carrying the weight of a terrible command. He took her hand gently and led her out of the castle, the snow crunching beneath their feet. The trees of the forest loomed tall and dark, their branches twisting like shadows in the dim morning light. Snow White's heart pounded, not knowing what lay ahead, feeling both fear and trust in the man beside her. The huntsman walked slowly, glancing at the girl with pity in his eyes. He could not lift the knife, for her kindness had touched his heart. "I cannot hurt you," he whispered. "Run now, child, and never return." Snow White's eyes widened with confusion and relief. She ran as fast as her small legs could carry her, the forest swallowing her in its cold, silent embrace. Snow White's breath formed little clouds in the air, and her heart raced with every step. The trees seemed to whisper secrets, guiding her deeper into the unknown. Hours passed as she fled, her shoes wet with melted snow and her skirts catching on twigs. Her mind swirled with thoughts of the queen's cruelty, of the huntsman's mercy, and of the strange path she now followed. Every shadow felt alive, and every rustle of leaves made her jump. The forest was both frightening and beautiful. Sunlight fell in golden streams, cutting through the branches, and birds sang in cautious, sweet voices. Snow White felt small but determined, knowing she must survive and find a safe place to hide. Her legs ached, her lungs burned, and she stopped beside a stream to catch her breath. The water reflected her pale face and dark hair, a reminder of her mother's wish. Snow White whispered a prayer, asking the stars and trees to protect her from harm. Deeper in the forest, she discovered paths she did not recognize. The wind moaned through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Shadows danced along the mossy ground, but Snow White pressed on, her courage growing despite her fear. At last, the sun began to dip behind the trees, painting the sky in pink and orange. Snow White's stomach growled with hunger, and she realized she could not go much farther. The forest was vast, and night would come quickly. She needed shelter, a safe place to rest. Through the thick branches, she spotted a clearing. In the center stood a small cottage, smoke rising from its chimney. It looked lonely yet welcoming, as if the forest itself had guided her to safety. Snow White approached slowly, her heart hopeful but cautious. The door was slightly ajar, and she peeked inside. 7 small chairs, 7 little beds, and tiny dishes covered the table. Snow White's eyes widened in wonder and relief. She whispered, "This must be a place for kind hearts, like mine." She stepped inside carefully, her fingers brushing the walls. The cottage smelled of wood and something sweet, a faint hint of baked bread. Her feet felt tired, and she sank into one of the small chairs, marveling at the safety she felt, even in the quiet of the unknown. Snow White tasted a little from each plate, her hunger guiding her. Each spoonful was a comfort, and she felt courage returning with every bite. Her little hands shook with cold and exhaustion, but her heart was lightened by this strange and gentle kindness that seemed to linger in the air. She drank a little from each cup, testing the taste, and felt the warmth seep through her tiny body. The forest had been cold and frightening, but this place gave her hope. Snow White's lips curved into a small, shy smile, the first in a long, anxious day. Next, she explored the beds, testing each one for comfort. She found one soft and perfect for her small frame. She lay down carefully, feeling the tension leave her body as she closed her eyes. The cottage was quiet, except for the soft whispers of the forest outside. Night fell, and the stars appeared above the clearing. Snow White listened to the wind, feeling the forest breathe around her. She did not know the dwarfs who owned the cottage, but she felt safe as if invisible guardians were watching over her. She dreamed of her mother, of the queen, and of the strange kindness of the huntsman. Fear still lingered in her heart, but for the first time that day, hope returned. Snow White understood that courage sometimes meant simply surviving. The forest was alive with sounds of the night, owls hooting softly, leaves rustling gently, and the distant cry of wolves. Snow White held her small hands together, whispering a prayer that tomorrow would bring safety and light. Snow White awoke at dawn, stretching and peering outside. Sunlight bathed the cottage, and the snow sparkled like diamonds on the trees. She felt renewed, ready to meet the unknown day with bravery. Soon, the cottage door opened slowly, and 7 small figures returned from the forest, their eyes curious. They noticed signs of a guest. A chair moved, plates touched, beds disturbed. Snow White froze, unsure of their reaction. But the dwarves were kind, their faces soft and welcoming. They asked her name and listened to her story with gentle eyes. Snow White spoke of the queen, the huntsman, and her flight through the forest, feeling the weight of her fear slowly lift. The dwarfs offered her a place among them, asking her to stay and help keep the home clean. They promised protection, and Snow White felt the warmth of friendship for the first time in weeks. She accepted, feeling hope return to her small, weary heart. The dwarfs warned her carefully, reminding her that the queen might discover she was alive. Snow White nodded, understanding the danger, but also knowing that she was not alone. Together, they formed a bond of trust and courage, and so Snow White began a new chapter of her life in the forest, learning to live, to care, and to survive. The fear that once ruled her heart was softened by friendship, and the quiet cottage became a place of safety and wonder. Chapter 4. The 7 Dwarves. Snow White looked around the small cottage and noticed everything was neat and tidy. Each chair, each bed, and each little dish seemed to have a special place. She felt a warm feeling in her heart, realizing she had found a safe place after the frightening forest. The door opened slowly, and 7 dwarfs returned from the mines, their faces tired but kind. They noticed the signs of a visitor: a chair slightly moved, plates touched, and beds a little disturbed. Their eyes widened in surprise as they saw the young girl inside. Snow White bowed politely and introduced herself, her voice soft and gentle. The dwarfs smiled warmly, their curiosity turning into kindness. They asked her story carefully, listening to each word as if every detail was precious and important. After hearing her story of the queen, the huntsman, and her flight through the forest, the dwarfs nodded with understanding. They could see the fear in her eyes, and their hearts felt a deep wish to protect her. Snow White's honesty touched them immediately. One of the dwarves spoke first, his voice small but full of warmth. "Stay with us," he said. "Keep our home clean and safe, and we will protect you." Snow White's face lit up with relief and joy. She had finally found people she could trust. The dwarves guided her around the cottage, showing her the beds, the kitchen, and the little garden outside. Snow White felt amazed at the care and order in everything. She realized that these small creatures had a big heart and a strong sense of family. She smiled shyly, feeling a lightness in her chest that she had not felt in a long time. For the first time since leaving the castle, she felt peace. The forest and the queen's jealousy were still far away, and the cottage became her new home. Snow White learned quickly how to help around the house, She washed dishes, swept the floor, and cooked simple meals. Each task made her feel useful and happy, and the dwarfs encouraged her with kind words. The dwarfs shared their stories with Snow White, talking about life in the mines, the songs they sang while working, and the small joys they found in each day. She listened carefully, feeling connected to their world and the rhythm of their lives. They taught her to be careful in the forest, warning her about dangers and how to stay safe. Snow White understood that the queen could still try to find her. She promised to follow their advice and keep her courage strong. At night, the cottage became a place of laughter and warmth. Snow White sat by the fire, listening to the dwarves' jokes and stories. She felt a happiness that was pure and simple, a new chapter of life opening before her. The dwarfs worked during the day in the mines, and Snow White kept the cottage in order. They returned each evening tired but satisfied, and she greeted them with smiles and meals ready. Their friendship grew stronger every day. Snow White admired the dwarfs' determination and care for each other. Even though they were small, their hearts were big, and they looked out for one another. She realized that family was not always about blood, but about love and loyalty. She began to feel confident in her new life, learning from the dwarves' wisdom and gentle ways. Each day, she grew stronger and more capable, her fear of the forest slowly fading as she settled into the cottage. The dwarfs noticed her kindness and bravery, and they often praised her with smiles and laughter. Snow White felt proud of herself for helping and caring, and the cottage was filled with joy and light. Snow White's laughter blended with the dwarfs' voices, and the small cottage became a warm, welcoming home. She learned that happiness could come from simple things, clean beds, good food, and friends who truly cared. Evenings were peaceful, and the stars shone brightly above the cottage. Snow White gazed out the window and thought of her mother's wish. She realized that her life, though difficult, was filled with love and hope. The dwarves treated Snow White like family, and she respected them in return. They shared meals, sang songs, and helped each other with chores. The cottage became a world of trust and harmony. She learned to cook small dishes, sew, and even mend clothes. Every day she practiced, and the dwarfs admired her effort. They encouraged her gently, making her feel accomplished and valued. Snow White began to enjoy the quiet moments by the fire, reading little books and listening to the forest outside. She felt safe and free, knowing that the dwarfs would protect her from harm. Her days passed peacefully, and the forest outside seemed less frightening. Snow White realized that courage could grow in a place of friendship and kindness. The cottage was her sanctuary, a place where she could dream again. The dwarfs' songs echoed in her ears each morning, reminding her of hope, work, and laughter. Snow White joined in their singing, and her voice blended with theirs, creating harmony and joy. Snow White's heart filled with gratitude for these small, caring creatures. She understood that the world could be harsh, but kindness and love could make it beautiful again. As days turned to weeks, Snow White grew stronger and happier. She enjoyed her work and her life with the dwarves. Each day was a small adventure, filled with laughter, learning, and discovery. The dwarfs trusted her completely, leaving her in charge when they went to the mines. Snow White proved herself responsible and brave, earning their respect and deep friendship. She felt safe in the cottage, and each night she thanked the stars for guiding her to this place. Her life was no longer full of fear, but full of hope, trust, and love. Snow White smiled each morning as she awoke, knowing she had found a home where she was wanted. The dwarfs had given her safety, and in return, she gave them care, friendship, and her gentle heart. In this small cottage, Snow White discovered the meaning of family and the warmth of true friends. She began to understand that life could be harsh, but love and courage could overcome fear. And so, Snow White's new life began with joy and hope. Each day she learned, grew, and laughed. The forest of fear felt far away, and the cottage became a home filled with light, warmth, and love. Chapter 5. The Queen's Evil Tricks. The mirror spoke to the Queen once more, revealing a truth she could not accept. Snow White was alive, smiling and safe in the forest cottage. The Queen's hands trembled, and a storm of anger filled her chest. She felt the icy grip of jealousy tighten around her heart. Her mind raced with cruel ideas. She would not allow the young girl to shine brighter than she did. Using dark magic, she changed her face, hiding her beauty and showing only a disguised, harmless old woman. Her eyes, however, still glimmered with a dangerous light. The Queen first prepared a delicate lace, soft and beautiful, hoping to trick Snow White into wearing it. She imagined the girl's innocence, believing it would make her easy to control. The lace was fine and shimmering, almost magical, and it held the Queen's dark intent hidden beneath its beauty. Snow White, curious and gentle, saw the lace and admired it. She did not suspect danger, for her heart was pure and trusting. The Queen smiled secretly, knowing that the girl's kindness would be her weakness, as it had always been. Next, the Queen prepared a comb, red and shining, carved with delicate patterns. She approached the cottage carefully, carrying the comb as if it were a gift. Snow White, eager to make herself tidy, accepted the strange woman's offer. The Queen's voice was sweet and inviting. "Try this comb, my dear," she said. Snow White nodded and allowed the comb to touch her hair. In that moment, the poison took hold, and Snow White collapsed, lifeless to the eye, but still breathing softly. The dwarfs returned from the mines that evening to find the cottage quiet and strange. They saw Snow White lying still, her hair spread across the floor, and their hearts ached with fear. They gently examined her and quickly discovered the comb. They removed it, and Snow White stirred and awoke. The Queen, angry that her first two tricks had failed, prepared her most dangerous plan. A red and white apple, poisoned on one side, glimmered in her hands. She disguised herself as a kind farmer woman, carrying the apple as a gift to lure Snow White. Snow White, cautious but curious, saw the woman at the door with a friendly smile. The Queen offered the apple and sliced it, showing that half was safe. Snow White was tempted by the sweetness and bright color. She smiled, believing in the fairness of the gift. The moment she bit into the red side, the poison worked instantly. Her body fell to the ground, silent and still, as though the life had left her completely. The dwarfs rushed in, trying to revive her, but nothing seemed to work. Their tiny hearts were heavy with grief. For 3 long days, they wept and mourned, keeping watch over her in a glass coffin they built with care. Snow White lay like a sleeping princess, surrounded by flowers and sunlight, her beauty untouched by the cruel events that had befallen her. The Queen, believing her plan had succeeded, returned to the castle, triumphant and cruel. She stood before her magic mirror once more, demanding praise and recognition. The mirror confirmed her false victory. Snow White was gone, and the queen's jealousy had seemed to win. But fate had other plans. A prince, riding through the forest, discovered the glass coffin and the sleeping girl. He marveled at her beauty, touched the golden letters on the coffin, and felt an immediate longing to honor her. The dwarfs hesitated, afraid to give the prince their precious Snow White, but his sincerity moved them. As they carried the coffin, it jostled slightly, and the piece of poisoned apple fell from her throat. Snow White gasped and opened her eyes, alive and whole once more. The prince smiled with relief, and Snow White looked around in wonder, realizing she was safe. The dwarfs cheered quietly, glad that their care and love had saved her. The queen's dark magic had failed, and Snow White's innocence had overcome it. Snow White traveled with the prince to his castle, feeling both excitement and curiosity. She met his people and learned about their kindness, experiencing a world beyond the forest she had come to know so well. A grand wedding was prepared, and the prince asked Snow White to be his queen. Her eyes sparkled with joy, and her heart was full of hope. She had survived danger, cruelty, and fear, and now life offered her happiness. The queen, still unaware of Snow White's revival, attended the wedding, her heart filled with dread. She asked her mirror once more, seeking reassurance, but the answer revealed a truth she could not deny. The new queen was fairer than she. At the wedding feast, the queen was punished for her cruelty. She had to wear red-hot iron shoes and dance endlessly, her pride broken and her wickedness exposed to all. The villagers and guests watched as justice was done. Snow White and the prince ruled with kindness, sharing happiness and caring for the people of the kingdom. They never forgot the dwarves, who had been their protectors and friends in the darkest moments of her life. The forest, once a place of fear, became a symbol of courage, friendship, and survival. Snow White's story spread through the land, teaching people about the strength of a pure heart and the danger of envy. Her days were filled with joy, laughter, and meaningful work. She learned that life could be both beautiful and difficult, but kindness and courage always lead to victory. Snow White never forgot the lessons she had learned from the dwarfs, the forest, and even the queen's dark magic. Each day was a new opportunity to love, help, and grow. And so Snow White lived happily ever after, surrounded by love, friendship, and the knowledge that goodness will always prevail over cruelty. Chapter 6. The Sleeping Princess. The dwarfs were heartbroken, their tiny hands trembling as they lifted Snow White into a glass coffin. The mountain air was cold and still, surrounding her with silence and sorrow. They placed flowers around her and sat in quiet mourning, their tears falling like gentle rain. Days passed slowly, the sun rising and setting over the mountain peaks. Snow White lay still, as beautiful as ever, her dark hair shining and her pale skin glowing even in the soft light. Birds perched nearby, singing softly, as if comforting the grieving dwarfs. Months turned into years, and yet Snow White did not age. The dwarfs kept watch, telling stories and sharing memories of her laughter. They prayed every day that somehow, some miracle would bring her back to life. Her beauty became a legend in the surrounding villages. Travelers spoke of the sleeping princess on the mountain, and people marveled at how peaceful and perfect she looked. Her story traveled far, filling hearts with hope and wonder. One bright morning, a prince rode through the forest, his horse moving swiftly over the winding paths. He had heard stories of the sleeping princess and felt a strange pull in his heart to see her with his own eyes. The prince climbed the mountain and found the glass coffin surrounded by flowers. He marveled at the young girl inside, her face calm and serene. "She is more beautiful than words can say," he whispered, his voice trembling with awe. He looked around at the dwarfs, who stood silently, their eyes wide with caution and hope. "May I take her to my castle?" he asked gently, bowing his head in respect. The dwarfs hesitated, but saw the sincerity in his eyes. As the prince's men lifted the coffin, the mountain air seemed to hold its breath. Then a tiny, almost imperceptible movement occurred. A piece of the poisoned apple fell from Snow White's lips, glinting in the sunlight. Suddenly, Snow White gasped softly, her eyes fluttering open. She blinked in surprise, seeing the sky, the mountain, and the prince who had come to her rescue. The dwarfs cheered quietly, tears of joy streaming down their faces. The prince smiled warmly and extended his hand. Snow White took it, still amazed by the world she had missed. She felt the warmth of life returning to her body and the gentle beating of her heart once more. Snow White looked around and saw the dwarfs, her small protectors who had cared for her even in death. She bowed her head, grateful for their love and devotion that had kept her safe through the years. The prince spoke softly. "You are safe now. Come with me to my castle." Snow White nodded, her heart filled with hope and courage. She felt ready to face a new life, full of adventure and love. The journey down the mountain was gentle. Snow White looked at the trees, the flowers, and the winding paths she had never noticed before. The forest that had once been frightening now felt alive and welcoming. Along the way, the dwarfs gave her gifts, small treasures from the mountains, flowers, and tokens of their friendship. Snow White held each one, touched by their kindness and loyalty. The prince told her about his castle, the gardens, and the people who awaited her arrival. Snow White listened carefully, imagining a world full of beauty and joy, a world she could now explore freely. They reached the castle gates, and the people gasped in amazement at the princess who had slept so long. Snow White smiled gently, feeling both nervous and excited to meet everyone. The prince guided her through the castle halls, introducing her to the servants and showing her the rooms she would one day call home. Snow White felt the warmth of kindness in every smile she received. The dwarf stayed near for a while, helping Snow White settle into the new castle. She promised them she would never forget their love, courage, and care that had saved her life. Each day, Snow White learned new things about the castle and the people who lived there. She discovered joy in simple moments, laughter, music, and the beauty of the gardens outside. The prince and Snow White spent time together, talking about dreams, hopes, and the future. She felt a connection she had never known before, and he admired her courage and gentle heart. As weeks passed, Snow White's confidence grew. She walked in the castle halls, greeted the villagers, and explored the palace gardens. Her heart was full, and she radiated happiness. The dwarfs often visited, sharing stories of the forest and reminding Snow White of her past. She cherished these moments, feeling the bond of friendship and love that had lasted through danger and time. Snow White wore simple clothes at first, learning the ways of the castle with patience. She helped the people and listened to their stories, always remembering the lessons of kindness, courage, and love. The prince admired her grace, strength, and wisdom. They laughed together, shared meals, and made plans for the kingdom. Snow White felt safe, loved, and free for the first time in many years. One evening, under a sky full of stars, Snow White thanked the dwarfs and the prince for everything. Her heart was full of gratitude and hope. She had survived the queen's evil tricks and found happiness beyond the forest. The prince held her hand, and together they looked at the distant mountains, where the forest whispered stories of courage and friendship. Snow White realized that life could be challenging, but love and hope always find a way. And so Snow White began a new chapter, alive and free, surrounded by friends, love, and the promise of happiness. Her story became a legend, teaching generations about courage, kindness, and the power of a pure heart. Chapter 7: True Love and the End of Evil. The castle buzzed with excitement and joy as the wedding day arrived. Snow White and the prince walked hand in hand, smiling at the cheering villagers and courtiers who filled the grand hall. Their hearts were full of love and happiness. The sun shone brightly through the stained glass windows, reflecting rainbow colors across the floor. The guests admired the beauty of the decorations and the warmth of the atmosphere. Everyone felt that this day was truly magical. Snow White looked at the prince and smiled, feeling her heart beat with love and courage. She remembered her journey through the forest, the dwarves who had cared for her, and the hardships she had faced. All of it had led to this wonderful moment. The prince whispered softly, "You are my true heart, Snow White." Today, we begin a life of love and happiness together. She nodded, her eyes shining with tears of joy and hope for the future they would share. The ceremony began with music, laughter, and applause. Friends, villagers, and the dwarfs all watched as Snow White and the prince exchanged vows, promising to care for each other and their kingdom with kindness and courage. The dwarfs stood proudly near the couple, their small hands clapping and their hearts full. They had protected Snow White, guided her, and helped her survive. Now they shared in the joy of her happiness and new life. The queen, still full of pride and jealousy, arrived at the wedding, hoping to see Snow White humiliated. But when she entered, she realized her power had ended. The kingdom had chosen love and kindness, leaving her cruelty behind. The mirror had once been her ally, but now it reflected her true self. She could see that Snow White's goodness had triumphed. The queen's face paled as she understood that her evil plans had failed. The villagers and guests watched the queen's punishment, and she was forced to face the consequences of her cruel actions. Her pride and envy could not stand against the love and courage of Snow White. Snow White and the prince smiled at each other, knowing that justice had been served and that love had conquered evil. Their hearts were light, and their spirits soared with the promise of a peaceful life. The dwarfs were celebrated as heroes of the kingdom. They had saved Snow White, taught her the value of courage and friendship, and shown that even the smallest hearts could make a big difference. Snow White promised the dwarfs that they would always be part of her life. They shared meals, laughter, and adventures together, strengthening the bonds of family and friendship that would never fade. The castle gardens bloomed with colorful flowers, symbolizing hope, life, and happiness. Snow White and the prince walked hand in hand, feeling the beauty of the world around them and the joy of their shared journey. The kingdom flourished under the kind rule of Snow White and her prince. Villagers felt safe, cared for, and happy, knowing their rulers valued kindness and fairness above all. The prince admired Snow White's courage, wisdom, and gentle heart. She had faced danger, survived the queen's tricks, and grown stronger. Together, they shared leadership and love, bringing peace to the land. Every day, Snow White remembered the lessons of the forest and the dwarves. She learned that true strength came from kindness, honesty, and courage, and that love could heal even the deepest wounds. The castle echoed with laughter, music, and happiness. Snow White and the prince hosted gatherings, shared stories, and celebrated life with friends and family, making their home a place of warmth and joy. The dwarves often visited, bringing tales from the mountains and sharing small treasures. Snow White and the prince welcomed them with love, grateful for their loyalty and bravery. The queen's evil had ended, and she could no longer harm anyone. Snow White's victory was a victory for goodness, showing that cruelty and envy cannot win against love and courage. Snow White and the prince traveled across their kingdom, helping those in need and spreading joy wherever they went. Their kind hearts touched everyone, making their rule a time of peace and prosperity. The wedding became a legend, told from generation to generation. People remembered how love, courage, and friendship could overcome fear, jealousy, and evil. Snow White never forgot the forest, the dwarves, or the lessons she had learned. Every day, she lived with gratitude, love, and a commitment to kindness in her heart. The prince and Snow White celebrated life together, enjoying every day with joy, laughter, and shared adventures. Their love was strong, steady, and inspiring to all who knew them. The castle gates were always open to friends, travelers, and the villagers. Snow White welcomed everyone with warmth, remembering how important kindness and hospitality had been in her life. The dwarfs were honored and celebrated, their courage never forgotten. They continued to live nearby, always part of Snow White and the prince's lives, sharing in their joy and protecting the kingdom together. Snow White and the prince ruled wisely, their hearts full of compassion. Their kingdom became known as a place of fairness, love, and happiness, where all could live safely and peacefully. And so, Snow White's story ended with true love, the end of evil, and a kingdom filled with joy. Her journey from the cold forest to happiness showed that courage, kindness, and friendship always triumph. Thank you for watching Easy English Official. Remember, every fairy tale helps you learn new words, feel deep emotions, and grow stronger. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more beautiful English stories every week. And remember, kind hearts are always the fairest of all.